Welcome back, everyone. I did make an early version of this video and I decided to redo it because I just felt he was just repeating the quotes from Parvana's book, and I wanted to go a little bit deeper, so I had a think about it and I looked a little bit deeper. So this is really the second version of this video that I plan to do.
Zainuddin says, what is the issue with the green dome that so many masjids have, and the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina has it, and the concept that some groups wear green turbans and green shawls or whatever piece of cloth that is green that they always carry with them, and they say that the Prophet ﷺ used to love the color green. First of all, to say and claim that the Prophet used to love the color green, I don't believe that this is authentic. Did the Prophet wear green? Yes, and he wore black and he wore white. And from all the colors, he praised the color white the most. And he said, shroud your deceased with white and wear it when you're alive. So he recommended us to wear white because this is the best of colors. To claim that he loved green more than anything else, this is not true. The domes built on masjids are an innovation. They're not related to Islam. Having them in green is also not related to Islam. You can have them in any color you want, but don't relate that to Islam. Don't say that it's green because Islam says so. No, Islam has nothing to do with that, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best.
So, the title is Mihr, the Circle of Justice, and the color green. Now, in the video that I've just shown you, you can see that he's quite worked up about the fact that some Muslims are associating Muhammad with green, and he's insisting, no, Muhammad was all into white. And why are these colors so potent? What's the issue? I'm going to suggest that maybe there's a long history behind this that's a bit uncomfortable maybe for those in the know, and that there's an Iranian connection with these colors that we're going to explore today. And of course, it was in Iranian lands that many of the hadiths were written. So this may not be entirely speculation. There's a certain amount of speculation here, but judge for yourself whether you think there's some substance to this. So, first of all, we're going to start with the circle of justice. What is that? Circle of justice is if the very foundation of the state and the defense of the realm were dependent on the prosperity of the kingdom, which itself could have been achieved only through equitable taxation, and the justice meted out to the peasantry, then any injustices inflicted upon the peasantry, in theory at least, give cause for rebellion and rob the monarchy of the very basis of its legitimacy. This is obviously from Parvana Pur Shariati. In Ta Alibai's narrative, it says, the king has a right vis-a-vis his subjects, and the subjects have rights vis-a-vis the king. The populace are obliged toward the king in that they must follow him, and in that they must not desist in giving him advice, that they should be friends to his friends and enemies to his enemies. It goes on to say that if there should appear heavenly or earthly calamities as a result of which their produce and wealth dwindle, the king is obliged to forego taxation in proportion to the damage. So in Iranian thought, the idea was that the king and his subjects have an agreement called the Circle of Justice, where the king basically looks after the subjects, and the subjects in return are loyal to him or her, if it's a queen. Now, also, the ideology of the Circle of Justice then, by definition, gave cause for questioning the very legitimacy of the state if it became dysfunctional, and the Sasanians realised this. The Mazdakites came from the poor, the base, the weak, and the ignoble plebeians, and so it was often the poor that rebelled. The Mazdakite interpretation of the Zoroastrian scripture relied ultimately on the Zoroastrian dualistic scheme of the universe, in which man held a central place. Now there's an interesting word, jittik, which refers to this world. The Zoroastrian worldview burdened man with instrumentality in the scheme of creation. He was the agent for establishing justice in the jittik, or this world, and this is connected again with the circle of justice. Now, Mihr worship and justice. Of all the forms of Mazdian worship, one in particular was best suited in being exploited for achieving justice, which is Mihr worship. The god Mihr belonged to the pre-Avestan Indo-Iranian pantheon of gods. There is important evidence that points to the prevalence of Mihr worship among some of the important Parthian dynastic families. So there's connection between Mihr worship and the Parthians. Obviously the Parthians were rebelling against the Sasanians. Okay, the Parthians typically were in the northern parts of Iran. Amongst these Pahlav families, Pahlav being another word for Parthian, amongst these Pahlav families, the god Mihr was bestowed with such primacy that the nature of Mihr worship espoused by some of the Parthian families of the quarter of the north and the east could not have been the same as that practiced by Mazdian Orthodox population. We may be seeing the origin of the description of the Parthian and Sasanian wars as apostasy wars, but they didn't happen in Arabia but in Iran. So this conflict between Mihr worship and the more orthodox Zoroastrianism may be the origin of that story of the apostasy wars, which was supposed to have occurred prior to the conquest of Iraq that we looked at recently. Mihr worship had come to be associated with the three functions of Iranian society: the monarchy, the army, and the peasantry. Mihr, or Mitra, was the god of covenants and pacts. Mitra was a pact or covenant entered into by two parties, two persons or tribes or peoples. The other was Varuna, apparently an oath taken by a single person. And the idea that they had in Mithraism is that these oaths or pacts were legalized utterance, which were seen as imbued with spirits, and those spirits would come to revenge those who broke those oaths. As far as Mihr as a god of contracts was concerned, there was only one thing sacred about contracts: their inviolability. Mitra's only concern is that fair or foul contracts must be kept. Because Mithra oversaw a pact entered into by two clans or tribes, if one party would break the covenant, the aggrieved party would then have recourse to Mithra, who, coming to their aid, undertook to set things right by siding with the aggrieved and punishing the covenant breakers. The genesis of the concept of him, Mithra, as war god, fighting always on the side of the just, is an important idea there connected with this. And it is attested for this many-sided divinity in his Avestan Yast, which is the scripture that was used by the Mihr worshippers. On the eschatological level of the individual soul, when he presides over the Sindvat Bridge tribunal midway between heaven and hell, compulsory passage of the soul of the faithful departed. So I'm taking that a little bit out of context there, but you will recognize that that this is found in Islam as well. So the concept of the Sindvat Bridge has entered Islam via the hadiths, which are of course written mostly in Iran. According to Islam, the bridge which every human must pass on the Yom al-Qiyamah, day of resurrection, to enter paradise. It is not mentioned in the Quran. This is purely a post-Quranic idea. And note, this Islamic theological concept comes directly from this Iranian religion, Mithraism, that was polytheist. They didn't seem to have a problem with borrowing theological ideas from the pagans. The attributes of Mihr as Lord, Covenant and Judge, as well as his warrior dimensions, are also central to the ideology of Circle of Justice, especially if we consider yet another function of the god, his association with royalty. The conception of kingship in the Iranian world as being contingent on the king's acquisition of divine glory, far. So kingship is linked to divine glory. Mithra bestowed the far on rulers, which is the fortune or glory. Mithra's concern with proper government arising from his political chieftainship and preoccupation with the covenant turned him into a maker as well as undoer of kings. How can we reconcile the three functions of Mithra, the monarchical, warrior and nourishing functions? Let's have a look. What do rain and vegetation have to do with contracts? According to an archaic, widespread, possibly worldwide belief, a king's moral behaviour is responsible for his people's welfare, in particular for their health and for the fertile climate of their country. Mithra bestows blessings on the country of the king who is faithful to his treaty. One of the chief accusations of the rebel Bahram-e-Chuban against the Sasanians was that the Mihrans were dejected by the activities of these Mobads, by which he undoubtedly meant their attempts to impose Zoroastrian orthodoxy. The narrative of the rise of the Sasanians in the Karnamag-e-Ardashir-e-Pagan contains folkloric elements. Halfway through their flight on horses, stolen from Ardavan's stable, when the sun had risen, the two were pursued by a ram, the agent that bestows royal glory, far, on behalf of the Yazata Mithra. The rising sun, the mounted warriors, and finally the ram are all Mithraic imagery that, in line with the function of Mithra as the maker as well as undoer of kings, hurls the transference of the far of the last Arsacid Ardavan to the first Sasanian king. Now these symbols of Mithra are going to be helpful as we look at one example from the Quran in just a moment. Dul al-Qarnayn, he of the two horns. This has obvious Mithraic overtones. The two-horned one reminds us of the ram, a symbol of Mihr. Now, whether this is merely a coincidence because of the similarity between the gods among the ancient civilizations was hard to say, but there's a lot of key ideas in this story as told in the Aramaic version that's borrowed in the Quran. So again, we just repeat that in that last passage we saw, the rising sun, the mounted warriors, and finally the ram are all Mithraic imagery. So let's have a look at the Quran, Surah 18, and I've highlighted key aspects which have Mithraic elements to it. We have Dul al-Qarnayn, which means the two-horned one. We also have the reference to the setting place of the sun. Mithra or Mihr is associated with the sun. And it says there, we said, O Dul Qarnayn, either punish or show them kindness. Okay, so there's a function of Mihr mentioned there. As for him who doeth wrong, we shall punish him, and then he will be brought back unto his Lord. So the idea of the avenging Mihr is certainly there. But as for him who believeth and doeth right, good will be his reward, and we shall speak unto him a mild command. And then it refers to, he reached the rising place of the sun, he found it rising on a people for whom we had appointed no shelter therefrom. In other words, they were being radiated with the god Mihr. Now, so this was written in Aramaic originally. It's possible that this was co-opted and given meaning, particularly when there were Iranians involved in Islam, and they could have projected an Iranian understanding to all of this. It's a bit of conjecture. Give your thoughts in the comment section below. Let's go a little bit deeper. So in the Hawadeh Namag tradition, which is another Iranian source, it's likewise infused with Mithraic concept, the sun as bestower of kingly power, the idea of contract between the king and his flock, the circle of justice, and the concept of Dado Mihr, justice, and Mihr are recurrent motifs in the Shahnameh. Okay. We should also point out that the Karens, these famous Iranians dressed in green, also worship Mihr, and Parvana gives us some evidence for that. She says a strong Mithraic current is also evident among the Karens, whose home territories had come to be in the quarter of the east, in Tabaristan, and parts of inner Khorasan, near the Berzan Mihr fire. And when we look a little bit later at where the Hadith writers were, this starts to make sense. Our first evidence to this effect is again theophoric. Of the 6 known progenies of the taurine Karanid Sukra, 3 bear Mithraic names: Zar Mihr, Dad Mihr, and Mihr. And then there's a reference here, according to the Tariq-i-Tabaristan, in one of Khosrow I's battles against the Turkish Kalkan, unexpectedly an army of about 2,000 to 3,000 emerged. It's not clear whence, all clad in green attire, so much so that all except their eyes and that of their horses were covered in green. Donning green and hurling green flags, they aided Khosrow I to victory. As a god who represents the 3 functions of royalty, warrior caste, and peasantry, Mihr also carries the 3 colours of white, red, and green, representing each function respectively. This would be part and parcel of Iranian culture, knowledge that lasted centuries after Islam had begun. Will this show up in the hadiths? Let's look in a moment. Again, royalty is represented by white, the warrior caste red, peasantry green, and these colours are all associated with Mihr. They are different functions of the god Mihr. Was Muhammad a lover of green or white? In light of what we know of Mithraism, these two traditions around Muhammad pose different conceptions of him. Was he the king in white or the populous peasant? It doesn't matter. These are both beloved Mithraic colours of huge significance to the Iranian writers of the hadiths. Now we can see here as some of the most significant hadith writers, I suppose we could say, maybe not all of the hadith writers, some of the more important ones. Obviously Sahih al-Bukhari is quite a big one, and these are all, or at least the majority of them, in areas that we would find Mithraism. And here we can see the locations. Okay, and at least in some of these locations there was Mihr worship, maybe not in all of them. Okay, so let's consider the idea of the white Mihr Muhammad. We can see here a reference to the whiteness on his hand. There's a reference here in reference to Muhammad, this white man who's leaning. We have here a reference to, I've granted the 2 treasures, the red and the white. Okay, and of course the reminder, white represents royalty, red represents warrior caste in Mithraism. Then we have a strange reference to the whiteness of Muhammad's armpits. To an Iranian, that would indicate that he is a reflection of the god Mihr. So this is why it's significant. Truly he, Muhammad, did see of the signs of his Lord the greatest. The Prophet saw a green screen covering the horizon, which to a Mihr worshipper would mean that the god Mihr was there. So Mihr is associated with the sun, which of course is found on the horizon, and also associated with the colour green. We have another reference here to a green carpet spread over all the horizon of the sky, so it's a variation of the previous hadith. And then it says here, when Allah's apostle died, he was covered with a hibra bird, a green square decorated garment. And another one, I saw the messenger of Allah wearing 2 green burud. I went with my father to the Prophet and saw 2 green garments over him. And then there's a reference here to the souls of the martyrs are in green birds suspended from the fruit of paradise or the trees of paradise. And we also have here a reference to Dajjal, and he will fool people by being dressed in green. I wonder why. Because green is the color of Mihr, and so therefore he's fooling the Iranians by being dressed in green. That's the way it would be viewed by the Iranians. Dajjal, the Antichrist, will be followed by 70,000 Jews of Isfahan, which is in Iran, and will be dressed in robes of green coloured satin. And here the Prophet is taking on the role of Mihr, the avenger of oath breakers. The Prophet said, "One should not take a false oath at this pulpit of mine, even on a green toothpick, a green toothstick. Otherwise he will make his abode in hell, or hell will be certain for him." So even the color green, if you're even if you're standing on a green toothstick, which is a symbol of Mihr, that won't help you if you take a false oath. So it's very, very much from an Iranian point of view, the connotation of Muhammad being presented as the incarnation of the god Mihr. At least that's how I take it. What do you think? Considering where the hadiths were written, it would not be beyond the bounds of possibility that Mithraism coloured the telling of these hadiths. It's not to say that any of these hadiths have any real historical value, but they certainly indicate that the culture of Iran helped to produce these hadiths, and they reflect perhaps more about Iran than they do of Arabia, where the stories are supposed to have originally occurred. So that's it for now. Talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching.
What is the issue with the green dome that so many masjids have, and the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina has it, and the concept that some groups wear green turbans and green shawls or whatever piece of cloth that is green that they always carry with them, and they say that the Prophet ﷺ used to love the color green.